Rabbi Jerry Goldstein, who is a friend of mine that goes back almost some 50 years.
Maybe more.
Maybe more, yeah.
I just lost you.
Goes back almost some 50 years.
Maybe more.
Maybe more, yeah. Okay, so now we are recording, and we usually begin our Shabbat morning study with some of the morning blessings, some music that allows us to prepare ourselves spiritually for this being the Sabbath. And Cantor, I'd like to invite you to begin with sharing a song and then the morning blessings.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think this morning, what I would ask that we do is sing along with me behind your muted microphones as we get ourselves into not only a Shabbat mood, but a mood of peace and quiet and contemplation. We'll turn to the age-old Lo Yisa Goy to do that. Lo Yisa Goy Goy Cherem Lo Yilmedol Milchama Lo Yisa Goy Goy Cherem Lo Yilmedol Milchama Lo Yisa Goy Goy Cherem Lo Yilmedol Milchama Lo Yisa Goy Goy Cherem Lo Yilmedol Milchama
That was beautiful.
Then with the magic of screen share, we will go to our morning blessings as soon as I can find them. There we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lesech v'bina lahavchin ben yom uven laila.
Praise you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hokeach ivrim.
Praise you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim.
Praise you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who frees the captive.
I lost the screen, sorry. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim.
Praise you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who lifts up the fallen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim.
Praise you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver.
Praise God, our God, sovereign of the universe, who strengthens our steps.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish harumim.
Praise God, our God, sovereign of the universe, who clothes the naked.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam anoten le'av koach.
Praise God, our God, sovereign of the universe, who gives strength to the weary.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavir shenai me'enai utnuma me'achapai.
Praise God, our God, sovereign of the universe, who removes sleep from eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'etzani b'tzelem Elohim.
Praise you, our God, sovereign of the universe, who made me in the image of God.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chorin.
Praise you, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has made me free.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael.
Praise you, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has made me a Jew.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael bigvura.
Praise you, our God, sovereign of the universe, who girds Israel with strength.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara.
Praise you, our God, sovereign of the universe, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. We join together in the English and ask you not to unmute, but please join as we recite the prayer. O Adonai, our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel.
Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael.
Thank you, Cantor. This morning, I am going to focus our lesson on a passage from the prophets. The reading in synagogue today is from the opening chapter of the book of Numbers, the fourth book of the Torah. It contains a census that is the focus of the first reading. And the book of Numbers is an unusual book in that it begins with a series of laws. Then after the first 10 chapters of laws, it has 4.5 chapters of narrative, returns to several chapters of laws, and then returns again to narrative. And so the entire book is built in this kind of intertwining of law and narrative. Alongside of every Torah portion, something that we've never studied consistently, but I think is very interesting for us to contemplate, are the readings that we call the Haftarah. Once last month, we actually looked at the Haftarah as the opportunity to study, and today I'd like us to focus on this Haftarah from the book of Hosea. We're going to read the Haftarah together, and because the Haftarah has a very profound connection to the idea of covenantal love. I hope that we will be able to learn, I think, a profound lesson that I think actually will be a part of our speakers' talk later on in the second hour of our being together. Hosea is a problematic prophet. It's a short book. The prophet Hosea is 14 chapters long, but most people never get past studying the first 4 chapters. The chapters set up a very unusual situation, and it's that situation that is used to teach the lesson of God's covenantal practice of being a part of the intertwined and loving relationship between the Jewish people and the divine. Hosea is told to take a wife who is a prostitute. That command immediately sets up a tension that frames the story itself. And it contrasts the Israelite or the Jewish people's lack of fidelity to God with God's fidelity to the Jewish people. And despite the lack of fidelity on the Jewish people's part, God's continued return through grace and love to be connected to the Jewish people. So those verses, which are even, as we will see, recited daily by religious Jews that put on tefillin, become a part of the notion of the loving relationship between God and the Jewish people. Most of us, when we think of the prophets, are often asking ourselves, are these rather dramatic presentations metaphor, or are they real? Most scholars have understood that these are actually metaphors for a very significant kind of relationship. And as we go into this reading, we'll be asked to think about this metaphor as a powerful way of thinking about the deeper way of connecting. So I'm going to share screen with you now, and we'll begin with the reading of the Haftarah. The Haftarah is basically the second chapter of Hosea. And I'm going to ask that we read this line by line. It's just 22 lines long. And we're going to meet Hosea's family. Sue, could I ask you to read the first 2 lines?
The number of the people of Israel shall be like that of the sands of the sea, which cannot be measured or counted. And instead of being told, you are not my people, they shall be called children of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel shall assemble together and appoint one head over them, and they shall rise from the ground, for marvelous shall be the day of Jezreel.
So just a quick comment. The first child is called not my people, lo ami. There is a transformation that in the future more perfected relationship, the people would be called B'nai El Chai, children of the living God. And this is envisioned as a response to a recovenanted people that are gathered in the valley known as Jezreel. So this is the prophet Hosea imagining a future. Go on, please, Sue, with the third verse.
O call your brothers my people, and your sisters lovingly accepted.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to just stop you there. The second child is called Ruchama. The child was originally called in the first verse Lo Ruchama. Now, I don't want to get off into television, but if you watch the series Shtisel, yes, our president is pointing to this. One of the plays for those people who are watching the television is that the daughter that is rejected and then eventually makes this incredible loving sacrifice, almost to the point of having, well, I don't want to give away the shtisel, but let's say that she is the daughter that is most troubled by what's going on in the family. Her name is Ruchama. And one of the levels of what's going on in the shtisel story is a playing out of this chapter of Hosea. Now, I didn't choose the Haftarah, I didn't write the shtisel, but you're going to have to see both to understand how they intertwine. I think Karen is already working on that. She was indicating that she was thinking about that. So, of all the children that they have in that family, Ruchama is the one, remember, that picks out this yeshiva bocher who's studying, and then she's the one who wants to have this child at, to the endangerment of her health. I hope that gives you enough of a clue from the shtisel thing. Jerry, just for your information, everybody has been in our congregation been watching it. We've had a conversation on shtisel before, so I hope that you will intertwine it into your watching of shtisel as well. So just a side remark, one of the things that happens in contemporary Israeli society is, yes, this is just a television show, and it's just, people with certain names. But this happens, by the way, also in Israeli poetry. you cannot just call somebody Ruchama without somebody saying, wait, Ruchama. Ruchama, that's a name from Hosea. I just invite you to be aware of that. Sue, you're doing a great job. Can I ask you to go on with one more verse, please?
Sure. Oh, call your brothers my people and your sisters lovingly accepted. Did I read that? Rebuke your mother.
Yeah, you read that.
I'm sorry. Rebuke
So,
your mother.
lovingly, I just want you to understand, lovingly accepted is the change of her name. She was called in the first chapter Lo Ruchama, and now she's called Ruchama, which is being translated here as lovingly accepted. Go on, please.
Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her put away her harlotry from her face, and her adultery from between her breasts.
Go ahead, please.
Else will I strip her naked and leave her as on the day she was born. And I will make her like a wilderness, render her like desert land, and let her die of thirst. I will also disown her children, for they are now a harlot's brood.
Go on.
In that their mother has played the harlot, she that conceived them has acted shamelessly, because she thought, I will go after my lovers, who supply my bread and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you there for a second. So, in a sense, what is being drawn up here is a set of accusations, and this is an accusation of the prophet Hosea is supposed to take this woman who has been unfaithful, and he's threatening divorce from this woman, and the idea here is that this is parallel to how the people of Israel have been unfaithful to God. Go on, please. I'm going to ask somebody else to read, maybe beginning with verse 8. Sandy, could you read that, please? Sandra?
Yeah, hold on. Can you, Sandra? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to look at okay, which verse do you want me to read?
Verse 8, can you see that?
Oh,
right here?
Assuredly, I will hedge up her roads with thorns and raise walls against her, and she shall not find her paths. Continue?
Yes.
Pursue her lovers as she will. She shall not overtake them, and seek them as she may. She shall never find them. Then she will say, I will go to return to my first husband, for then I fared better than now. And she did not consider this. It was I who bestowed on her the new grain and wine and oil, I who lavished silver on her and gold, which they used for Baal. Assuredly,
Okay.
I will
I'm
take.
just
Yeah.
to stop you there for a second. So the wife is unfaithful. She goes out and thinks that she's received all these gifts, and then she returns because she understands that the gifts were really the gifts from her first husband, i.e., Israel went after these strange gods, and they are described as Baal. Baal is one of the ancient gods of Canaan. It is also a Hebrew word that means husband or owner. And it is a key word here that we'll learn. But
Is that the same as Baal Tshuva?
Baal Tshuva is part of that word. The word Baal Tshuva here means, Baal means owner or master, or someone involved with Tshuva, return. Yes. Okay. So they went after Baal, this strange god, and they forgot that what they had really received were gifts from God. Okay. The Beth Ohr being that she had forgotten the true source of her gifts. Okay. Sandy, go on, please.
Which one? Now I will
Assuredly.
I will take back my new grain in its time and my new wine in its season, and I will snatch away my wool and my linen that served to cover her nakedness. Now will I uncover her shame in the very sight of her lovers, and none shall save her from me. And I will end all her rejoicing, her festivals, new moons, and Sabbath, all her festive seasons. I will lay waste her vines and her fig trees, which she thinks are a fee she received from her lovers. I will turn them into brushwood, and beasts of the field shall devour them.
So the forces of nature will turn to not being successful. They will just turn into weeds. Go on, please.
Then I will punish her for the days of the Baalim, on which
That's
she brought
plural for Baal,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
right, on which she brought them offerings. When decked with earrings and jewels, she would go after her lovers, forgetting me, declares the Lord. Assuredly, I will speak.
I'm going to stop you there for a second. So now, that's the list of accusations. There's a pivot in the rhetoric, and now God, Hosea, seeks to woo the people back. Hosea seeks to woo his wife back after this list of accusations. And I'm going to ask Donna if you wouldn't mind picking up the reading at this point, verse 16.
Thus, assuredly I will speak coaxingly to her and lead her through the wilderness and speak to her tenderly. I will give her her vineyards from there and the valley of Achor as a plowland of hope. There she shall respond as in the days of her youth, when she came up from the land of Egypt. And in that day, declares the Lord, you will call me Ishi, and no more will you call me Baali.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. There's, if you will, a profound problem here in the metaphors we've been using. So this image of unfaithfulness has obviously been using women as the object of the unfaithfulness. And here this intersects with an interesting challenge to a kind of feminist sensitivity in the language of Hebrew. In modern Hebrew, many women will not call their husband Baali. Because of the connotations of ownership and mastery. And they will often use the word ishi, which is more commodious with the idea of partnership, my man, or ben ben zug or bat zug, my partner. But this is using what I would call the very problematic and masculine language that is being struggled with even here in prophetic times in the 8th century BCE. So interesting that this has an echo in modern times as well, in terms of the language. Donna, go on, please.
For I will remove the names of the Baalim from her mouth, and they shall nevermore be mentioned by name. In that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the creeping things of the ground. I will also banish bow, sword, and war from the land. Thus I will let them lie down in safety.
So now, I'm just going to, this new covenant, if you will, this New Testament, I'm going to use that for you to just hear the radicalness of what Hosea is proposing in the 8th century, that despite everything that is in the past of this unfaithfulness, there will be a new covenant. And first of all, it's described as a change in the natural order of the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, are living in peace. The instruments of war banish the bow, the sword, and banishing war from the land. So this is, if you will, at all seasons, something that is profoundly to be sought after. It does remind me of the joke that is a little dated, but still important. That prophetic call still has a bit of an edge to it. There were a group of Jewish tourists that were visiting in Jerusalem, and they ran into the zookeeper, a person that some of you may remember. His name is Kissinger, and he was in charge of the zoo, and they were being taken through the zoo, and lo and behold, they see a lion lying down with a lamb. And they see, as in our verse, this radical transformation of nature, and they say, you must be the Kissinger that won the Nobel Peace Prize. This is a tremendous achievement, what you've done here. Mr. Kissinger, how did you do it? And he says, well, we put in a new lamb every day. Sorry, I just can't resist that joke. Okay, but this is, if you will, the prophet saying that God, and to put it in the language of Heschel, God will begin to entice the Jewish people back and begin to create this new natural order. And then the very famous words that are part of the putting on of the tefillin every day, and a part of the devotion that is from this book of Hosea, V'rastich li leolam, v'rastich li b'tzedek u'mishpat, u'v'chesed u'v'rachamim. Donna, if you'd read the verse 21.
And I will espouse you forever. I will espouse you with righteousness and justice and with goodness and mercy. And I will espouse you with faithfulness. Then you shall be devoted to the Lord. In that day I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the sky, and it shall respond to the earth. And the earth shall respond with new grain and wine and oil, and they shall respond to Jezreel.
One last verse.
Yes, I will sow her in the land as my own, and take Lo Ruhamah back.
I apologize. The verse, the Haftarah ends at verse 22. So very powerful. Erase from your mind the last three verses we read. So it ends with V'rastich li be'emunah v'yadat et Adonai, and I will espouse you with faithfulness. Then you shall be devoted to the eternal. So this, if you will, is this notion that God is, in a sense, beginning the process of searching for our attempt to connect to the divine with the profound transformation of nature and the connection to the divine presence. I'm just going to ask if I don't know if the Cantor is still with us. Do you know the music for this Verastich? I know it's a 50-yard line audible.
Not to pull out from under my kippah, no. The irony is Shayna and I were actually talking about it this morning, trying to see if either one of us remembered it well enough to pull it out, and both of us decided that no.
Okay, I just thought I would ask you. So part of what I think we discover with this beautiful Haftarah is the profound and powerful imagery that makes up the teaching of the Haftarah, and raises, if you will, the question of how we as a people have understood the prophets. They are not, as is sometimes suggested, people that predict the future. They may speak about a future, but normally their understanding is that they're warning against the potential disaster that may visit the people if the prophetic voice is not listened to, and often their dramatic portrayal. One of the great portrayals is that the prophet Isaiah spends 3 years walking around the city of Jerusalem naked, proclaiming the word of God. Now, are these actual things that happened? Probably not. But they are, if you will, these dramatic calls for justice, for a shift in the way people see the world, and a demand that the people, especially the wealthy, the upper class, the privileged, adjust their vision, not to their own interest, but to the idea that they have a responsibility to the prophetic vision. And the prophetic vision is one in which we're supposed to see through God's eyes the situation of the poor, the oppressed, the widow, the orphan. And it's in seeing through God's eyes that we're called to this radical realignment with our behavior. And so I think it's very fortunate that we have this as our reading today. We're going to move to the Aleinu and our prayers for the sick and Kaddish, and then we'll introduce Rabbi Goldstein in a moment and have him speak about his experiences at 11:30. So let us begin first with prayers for our friends who are ailing. And I know that people will also want to add a prayer for peace during the appropriate time as well. So if you're wanting to share the name of someone, please on mic and share the name. Claudia, would you like to begin?
Susan Johnson.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, Ken Werner and Ahmed Yeya.
Thank you. Sandra?
Vera Budinoff.
Sue?
Brooke Riva,
Donna? Polly?
Mikiko, Pat Sachs, and Diane Warco.
Sherry? Randy?
Harold Sumner,
Karen?
Suzanne Joyce, Julian Smith, Rachel Furman, Jane and Izzy Broger.
Rabbi Jerry, would you like to share the name of someone you're praying for?
Rabbi Jerry, I think you're muted still.
I'm trying to hit it. There it is.
There we go.
You caught me. I was looking at commentary on Hosea. My brother-in-law right now has suffered what I guess must be, he had a clot on his brain and they took it out and it has left him on the edge of life. As my sister says, he is 50-50. Perhaps with your prayers, you can push it up to 51-49. What makes it harder yet religiously is they say that if he does survive, he'll probably live like a vegetable. And he will have lost his powers of being a human. But then when you put that in, it's hard to want to make it 40 to 60 or in which direction. I pray for my sister. I pray for my brother-in-law, Alan. I pray for myself to comprehend the confusion of this time.
Thank you, Jerry. Anyone, Cantor Andy?
My little sister, Anna. My mom, Ellen.
I'd like to add my brother Bob.
Misheberach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Yisheberach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Thank you, Cantor. It's our custom that we recite the Aleinu, and I'd like to invite everyone to rise as Cantor leads us in the Aleinu, as it's on the screen.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות אדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Thank you, Cantor. This week we've heard of the continuing struggle in India with the pandemic. This week we've heard of the issues in Israel, Palestine. And then, of course, we have our personal memories of people that we love that we're about to recite Kaddish for as well. I'd like to invite people who have someone that they would like to designate to have you announce their name at this time.
Robert Steinberg.
Jerry?
Rob Block. Thank you.
My mother, Mary Goldstein.
Thank you all. It is time to recite the Kaddish, and Cantor will place it on the screen for us all to see with your eyes. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah v'yalmod divrach hirotei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'mechon chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'agalav zman kariv v'yimru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'mei olmaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal Shemei Kedusha b'richu
Richu.
La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata gamiram v'yimru Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shlomo Rabbah min Shamaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Amen.
May the one who makes peace, the heavens make peace for us, the terrestrial realms, and let us say, Amen.
Amen.
We are appreciative of the fact that normally at this time we would have Cantor sing a song to conclude our service. And I think if that's something you prepared for now, Andrew, I'd like us to do that, and then we'll go into introducing Rabbi Jerry.
Thank you, Rabbi. I will do something short and completely off topic from today's Haftarah study, but this is drawn from the Megillah of Ruth that we will be normally studying for Shavuot. I believe that actually this year we're not dealing with Ruth, we're talking about other things, but I'm going to just put Ruth back in. This is a melody that I, of course, came across because of Leonard Cohen of blessed memory, but it was originally made famous by Mary Ford and Les Paul back in 1954. Although I will bet you that Polly knows it from Perry Como. This is Whither Thou Goest. Whither thou goest, I will go. Wherever thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, my love. Whither thou goest, I will go. For as in that story long ago, that same sweet love story now is so. Thy people shall be my people, my love. Whither thou goest, I will go. Oh, whither thou goest, I will go. Wherever thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, my love. Whither thou goest, I will go.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I want to invite our president to share with us announcements and greetings. I think I'm catching her a little off guard, but give her a chance to Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi. Great teaching. Thank you, Cantor, as well. Always has the right thing to close with. Oh dear. So coming up tomorrow, our Shavuot observance, connected with 4 Bay Area synagogues, including and especially congregation near Tamid, for which we have a special connection since Rabbi Chandler Leon is married to our cantor Andy. And so all the things that they get to talk about at breakfast or whatever other time, we all benefit from. And so tomorrow evening at 7:30, from 7:30 to about 9:15, we will be engaged in study and discussion and music and whatever else wonderful things come out. Rabbi Haim will be speaking about something what I don't remember, but he's here to tell us. And then that is it for our year, our school year, as it were. We will be taking a break. Beth Ohr will be taking a summer break. And but stand by, we never know what interesting things Rabbi Haim will be inspired to discuss. But regular programming will resume in the fall after the High Holy Days. We will be celebrating the High Holy Days. We will. Where? We will see. It's looking good for in-person services. So stay tuned. I think that's it. Rabbi, Sue, any other announcements? Oh, I just thought one other thing, and Sue, you can talk about this. The possibility for the interfaith work. Please, can you say a word about that?
We were advised that there's a kind of a citywide invitation for congregations of every faith to come together in an organized group with city agencies and non-governmental agencies who are in the who are working in the areas of homelessness and social justice and immigration, migrants and foster care. And there may be something I have left out. And so they're looking for someone from each congregation to represent the congregation, to not only reflect any ideas that we may have, but also to absorb the information that we get from those agencies and send it out to our congregation. And there may be some actual active work that they will ask us to do, but that's not clear right now. But they certainly want faith-based congregations to be involved in these different efforts. So they are looking for a person that can be kind of a point person to reflect back and forth to the organization and to the congregation. So if anyone is interested in that, if you could let me or Karen know, we would really appreciate it.
So friends, just a small note, we do have one concluding conversation about the earlier referenced shtisel segments that remain for us to discuss, and we'll schedule that in the not too distant future. We want to give people a chance to see the remaining parts of it. I want to now shift to formally introducing my colleague of many years. I have so many stories to tell you about Rabbi Jerry Goldstein, who has been one of the people that I would call an exemplar in my life. He was, in many ways, my Hillel rabbi, and he was, he is and remains a friend of our family. He was the Misader Kiddushin, the rabbi for two of my children's weddings, and we have for many, many years, we studied on Thursdays, I think for some 15 years, in various places around the city of Los Angeles. And I don't think there's a family event or a book that each of us have read that we haven't had the opportunity to discuss. One of the things that I have always wanted to have is to ask Jerry to talk about his earlier career when he was first ordained, when he was a rabbi in Minneapolis. And he was involved early on with the issues of civil rights. In fact, civil rights, human rights have been one of the important themes of his rabbinate throughout the time I've known him, whether it was death penalty work or civil rights. Rabbi Jerry has always been on the front lines. And we have such a wonderful opportunity to learn from him. And I'm going to ask him to share with us his reflections, which we've entitled Reflections on a Rabbi That Began in Minneapolis, Thinking About Minneapolis in the Current Moment. And welcome to Beth Ohr, and welcome to our congregation on Zoom.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, yes, I am an antique friend of Haim Beliak. It was, but he misunderstands me. I wasn't in Minneapolis. I was in St. Paul. That's like saying I was at the Mount Sinai.
I apologize.
It's all right. I was the rabbi, an assistant rabbi, 27, 28 years old, just out of the Hebrew Union College, ordained as a rabbi in 63. And I went to Mount Zion Temple. That is the oldest synagogue in the old Northwest Territories. It's now a synagogue that it was founded back in the early 1800s, actually, when it was the frontier. It's now a stuffy, old Reform temple with antique legs. Very respectable place, right on Summit Avenue, center of St. Paul, Minnesota, down the street from the state capitol, on a street that's lined with grand churches of every denomination. On June 18th, in 1964, I was arrested, and the story was on the front page of the St. Paul and the Minneapolis newspapers and the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times and the Washington Post. I was arrested for trespassing. I was arrested for a malicious breach of the peace. And I was arrested for conspiracy. Now, if you think that goes over well in a nice old synagogue on a respectable street down the block from the state capitol, you're wrong. Actually, it may have been a high point in my relationship with the synagogue of which I was a rabbi. Here's the booking sheet, actually. You can't see it at the distance, but I have a picture of it. And there's a whole list of people that were arrested that day. And here's Gerald Goldstein from St. Paul, Minnesota. And it indicates the charges brought against me. And I went to jail. I was part of the largest mass arrest of rabbis in the history of the United States. That's some place to be in the record books. It's the largest. There were 17 of us, Reform rabbis, all involved in these terrible acts which led to our arrest. And the question that Rabbi Haim wants me to answer is, why did you go? Why did you want to be arrested? And I'll tell you the story because I've only told it about 100 times in my life. People are fascinated by a notion of a rabbi being treated like a common criminal. I had gone in just a couple of days before my arrest. I left St. Paul to go to the Central Conference of American Rabbis. That's the largest organization of rabbis probably in the world. All the Reform rabbis in the United States or elsewhere are members of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Up to that point, I had never, ever gone to the Central Conference of American Rabbis. I hadn't been a rabbi. But I went in 19, when was it? I'm losing my marbles here now. In 1964, okay, that's the anniversary. 1964, I'd gone off to Atlantic City for the convention. I just got there, and then that evening was the opening of the convention. And I was sort of awed to be in this audience of, 400 rabbis, all of them older than me, all of them gathered there, really notable rabbis who I had read about or heard at ordination or somewhere in my life. It was an awesome crowd to be part of, and I was the youngest. And right out of the box, right after the first greetings, Rabbi Cy Dresner was called upon, and he brought a message to us from Martin Luther King Jr. And it was inviting the Central Conference of American Rabbis to send a delegation to St. Augustine, Florida, to join with protests there against segregation. Now, I gotta tell you, I wasn't a civil rights advocate at that point. I hadn't really done anything out of the ordinary for a nice Jewish boy who grows up in Beverly Hills, California. I'd gone to Beverly High, and I had been part of a project where a group of us guys during, I think it was my junior year, we did what nice middle-class people can do. We went once a week after school from Beverly High. We had a carpool and we drove downtown to a settlement house in East LA, where boys and girls, mostly boys, from poor families, all of them of color, of course, came to play, to learn something about getting along with people. And so this was our nice training in patronizing the poor. We would go untrained 17, 16-year-olds, and we would spend the afternoon with these poor kids. That was generous. It's very nice. It was well-intentioned. That's my background. I never took part in any protest. I never stood in any picket line, never that sort. But here I am in the Central Conference of American Rabbis Convention, 4 days of fine Jewish program ahead of me. And I listened to Rabbi Cy Dresner, read this note from Martin Luther King Jr. He wasn't yet St. Martin. He was not yet unnotable. He was, I knew of him. I'd read some of the things that he had said or done, but I wasn't in the fan club. But I am a curious man. I like studying history, and it sounded like a moment to watch a moment of history unfold. I'd go down there with a group of rabbis, and we would help them in their protests somehow. And I could learn something about how those things go. It was a study opportunity. I was not in my real operating conscious. I think that I wasn't thinking about social justice so much as my own erudition. What an interesting moment I can be part of. So I joined it, just a little bit, so you should understand what was going on. There were 17 of us who left that conference. There were 350, 400 rabbis there. One of the rabbis, of course, was my senior rabbi at Mount Zion Temple in St. Paul. And I think just out of derech eretz, I went to see him first before I officially signed up to go in the delegation. And I said, I don't want to use his name because that's past history. But I called him by his first name. And I said, you know what? I didn't even call him by it. I said, Rabbi John. I think I want to go with that group of rabbis tomorrow to Florida. And his answer was the outstanding work of support. Jerry, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to go down there? You know it's not going to make any difference, don't you? I said, I don't know, but I'm sort of curious about it. I want to go. Oh, it's a waste of time. That's the encouragement I got from my rabbinic colleague. But you know what? The majority weren't going there. They were ready to throw some money into a pot to help us pay our airfare down south. So I got on the airplane the next morning with the 16 others, including Cy Dresner. And we flew to the nearest airport, which was Jacksonville, Florida. Now, I suppose most of you don't know where St. Augustine is. It's in northern Florida, which is part of the Old South. It still is. It was a absolutely segregated city. I found out when I got there finally what the black people, the niggers as they were called, what they wanted was an opportunity to be hired as policemen, firemen, and other emergency workers. That was their request, for which they had been protesting for 2 months. I never read a word about that in the newspaper. I didn't read that every single night the black people of the town, or many of them, maybe most of them, would gather in their church or churches to pray and to unify and to try to gain self-respect. And then at about 8 o'clock at night, they would march to the old slave market, which was about a half a mile away from the Baptist church, which was the headquarters of the protest. They would march downtown. Often they were arrested. They were always harassed. They would go all the way downtown to what was the old slave market. Now it's just called the market, but it's a central square in St. Augustine. But not a word of it was in the paper. Not even in the St. Augustine paper did they ever cover it. Because it was just some, I don't know, crazy niggers who were upping. They were trying to, didn't know their place, didn't know how to behave properly. You know, it's sort of shocking to really come into the middle of that. They really felt quite abandoned. And it was the genius of Martin Luther King to get some nice white ministers, clergy people, get them to come down and march with these blacks on their nightly walk down to the slave market. It is a phenomenon. As I look back on it, I didn't even understand how scary a situation it would be for me. I wrote an article for the Central Conference of American Rabbis once, and I called it my scariest night. Scariest. I'll tell you about that. But you'll notice I'm sort of avoiding, why did I go there? Part of it was out of innocence, sheer blooming innocence. I'll go see what's happening. So the 17 of us were picked up at the airport in Jacksonville and driven less than an hour to St. Augustine. And we gathered outside the church, and we walked into the back of the church, and they were all in, I don't have the vocabulary for it, but the congregation was gathered, and they were listening to Martin Luther King, who I'd never met and hardly knew about. And I'm standing just inside the door at the back of the church. He could see us, but the congregation was listening to him. And we came in, and when he saw us, he stopped in the middle of his sentence. And he says these words of introduction. Ah, Moses's people have come to support us and stand with us. Now, I've never had an introduction like that since. I'm part of Moses. I am Moses's people, come to stand with these browbeaten black folks praying every night. So we went in and we sat down. Now we were all dressed properly. We had been told, wear your rabbi costume. In those days, it was a dark suit, a tie, a white shirt. And I gotta tell you, that may have been the hottest place I've ever had to sit. It was very hot and very humid, like a June day in the South can be. And it was awful, but it was picturesque. You know how the congregation was sitting there? They all had these little, there was no air conditioning, of course. The windows were open, it didn't matter. They had fans, you know how those fans, but they were ads for the local mortuary, you know, and everybody sitting and fanning themselves with these mortuary fans. I wasn't laughing though, because it was really very interesting to observe. I'm always this kind of observer in this. And I heard what they were saying, and then they called on Cy Dresner to say a few words. Cy is the most arrested rabbi in all of America. He's still alive. There are 4 of us, 3 of us now that are left alive from that arrest scene. But Cy had already been arrested several times before that. That's why he was the contact that Martin Luther King chose. Yeah. And he was invited to talk. And this is in this hot, let me turn that off. Okay. It's hot. And Cy Dresner starts like rabbis can do, to talk and talk and talk. Well, you've all heard Martin Luther King speak. You know, that's one of the champion orators of the 20th century. That was just, and in comes Cy Dresner from New Jersey, and he begins to talk. And so help me, some of the senior rabbis in my own group start saying to him, Cy, genug, it's enough, it's enough. They were telling him to stop. That was almost comical, because it was comical that he should be talking right in the footsteps of the master speaker. Finally, he got the hint and he stopped talking. And then we were taken out. We were told to go out and stand in front of the church. We were each of us paired off with a black partner. The strategy was to test the interstate commerce laws. St. Augustine was celebrating the fact that year that it was the anniversary of the founding of St. Augustine, Florida. And they were inviting Americans to come from wherever they lived in America to visit St. Augustine for the anniversary of the city. 350 years or some outrageous number, I don't remember. But they were inviting publicly with advertisements in newspapers and on television, come visit St. Augustine, the oldest city in America. We were coming from all over America. I was coming from Minnesota. And the black man who walked with me was there from Alabama. I think that's part of the United States too. We were all being part, we said, of the celebration of this city's anniversary. We should all be treated equally, some equal. Listen to what happens on my scariest night. I was paired off with this black man, and each of my colleagues was. We were to walk side by side down the center of the street from the church to the old slave market. There were about a dozen patrolmen that the governor had assigned to keep us from making trouble. So this dozen uniformed highway patrolmen, I would call them, they went 6 on one side and 6 on the other. And there were, I don't know, maybe 70, 80 black folks with us. We were a parade going downtown with, thank God, a dozen highway patrolmen on each, 6 on each side, but stretched out in a line that's pretty long. And because the St. Augustine newspaper had run the banner headline in the newspaper that day, that these clergymen from all over America, white men, are going to walk with blacks tonight downtown. That's the first time there was any article about the demonstrations in the St. Augustine newspaper. And everybody showed up to stand on the curbs. Think of the Rose Parade or something. They were all there, fathers with their kids on their shoulders so they could see what was going on. And on every single street corner, and I'm not exaggerating, on every single corner between the church and the market, there were gangs of hoodlums. People, they were angry as hell. They were maddened by the sight of whites and blacks walking together down the street. It violated every norm in their bodies. It was an assault, like what we saw on January 6th at the Capitol. And people that were maddening, just red. You know, they talk about rednecks. These were rednecks. In their hands, on one hand, they'd have a broken bottle, and in the other hand, they'd have a brick. And you knew full well that any moment now, they could let loose with that bottle or that brick. See why I call it a scary night? I walked through that, but not until I got the speech from Martin Luther King. He had us all lined up, and then he says to everybody, the blacks and the whites lined up, there's going to be a lot of people out there who don't like you. There's going to be a lot of people out there who are going to yell things at you, and you won't like what you hear. And you will want to speak back, or worse. And I tell you, we are pledged to nonviolence. We will not be violent, even verbally, with any of those people out there. That is our strength, being nonviolent. Our demonstration is that we are doing what we are doing. That's really noble advice, and I must say it really struck me right there. I hadn't yet seen the mob out there, but he was telling me there's a mob of people out there that hate you for what you are doing. walking down the street with blacks. And it's true. They yelled at us. You communists, get out of here. You goddamn Jews, go back where you came from. You don't belong here. Get out of here. Yeah, foul language of the most violent, horrible nature coming at you from the right and the left, from people who hate you, from people who are ready to just kill you. And I walked with my friend down the center of the street. We walked all the way to the marketplace. And then we were dismissed and we went home. Now, it wouldn't have been very hard for me to have been hurt. It sure happened the next night and the night after that. But you just have to, it's a lesson in how, how people can operate socially in terms of what they think is right and absolutely right. And what a horrible violation it was of everything normal. If I had walked naked down that street, like Hosea walked for several days in Jerusalem, theoretically, but I really was there, in suit and tie, on a hot night. It stuck in me. That was a turning point in my life. I came as an observer, and it turned me into a zealot for civil rights, for human rights. And it also inspired me with the message of nonviolence. You're not going to beat down, you can't beat down the system by beating harder on them. You've got to do something else. And we haven't yet figured it out, actually. We were arrested when the next morning I invited my black friend to have lunch with me at one of the nicer restaurants in town, next to Monson's Motor Lodge. We were all programmed. I did learn that demonstrations don't just erupt. Good demonstrations have some kind of organization to them. So some of us were assigned to go eat in a restaurant with one of our guests. Others were cued to go swimming in the pool of the Monson Motor Lodge. That was what got a picture on the front page of most American papers. These rabbis and their black friends swimming together in the pool, the swimming pool, with the manager of the Monson Motor Lodge pouring acid into the pool while they were swimming. I mean, it was a great photograph for the front page of papers. You can find it on the internet if you want. I was doing something simpler. We parked the car and we made a circle of all of us who were going to be going into the restaurant. And we began to recite from memory Psalms, Psalm 23. That's a arrest. That's a cause for arrest in a situation like that. I was reciting the 23rd Psalm in English, together with black folks on the parking lot of the restaurant. And the police came around and arrested us one by one. They came up on me on either side, two plainclothes policemen. They grabbed me, one with this arm and one with this arm. And the newsreel caught that moment. I wouldn't have remembered what I said, but it's plainly recorded. I said, "Get your hands off me, I'm a human being." Now that was a statement of, I'm proud of myself for having had that response. I'm a human being. Not I'm a white man, not I'm a rabbi, not I'm from California, not that I'm a respectable middle-class citizen. I'm a human being. Treat me like a human being is what I was yelling to no avail against the policemen who were grabbing me and the others. We said we wanted to be arrested together with the blacks and go with the blacks together. And they said, "Shut up and get in the car." Whites and blacks were segregated right at that moment. And we arrived in jail, St. John's Jail, and that's my booking sheet right there. That's a novel experience, getting arrested like that. It stays in my mind. Jail was hot. We all 17, plus 2 Episcopalian priests who had been arrested the day before. We were all put in one cell for 2 people. We were all of us jammed into 2 beds, 1 toilet, 1 sink, and we spent 24 hours there. I didn't know how long it would be, but the lawyers had said, "We'll get you out pretty soon." The lawyers from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. It was quite miserable in there. They had to give us food, had to give us healthy food. They weren't so dumb as to try to starve us or something or torture us. They just jammed us 17, 19 in a cell for 2. And we took the beds apart so there was a mattress on the floor and the springs were on the bed, and we took turns sleeping. And they brought us breakfast, of course. Little cans or jars of Gerber's baby food. Baby food, strained spinach, strained peas, strained, I don't know what else. It's good food. There's nothing wrong with it nutritionally, but what a way to insult a bunch of, rabbis, let me be brave, clergymen, national visitors to your town, serve them baby food, little jars of baby food. We wouldn't eat it. But that was just and then while we were in jail, the warden of the jail, who was also the sheriff of the jail, it's a little county, the warden, Haas Manusi was his name. And he was the local leader of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, there's a qualification for being a warden in a jail, don't you think? He comes in to bring us a visitor. Mr. Bernstein, who ran a clothing store on Main Street. He came in to talk to the rabbis. He was the president of the local shul, no less. And what the hell is he going to say to us with Haas Manusi standing next to him and a store on Main Street. You rabbis don't know what you're doing here. We get along just fine here. Everything is just, we are neighbors. We shop in each other's stores, and it's very peaceful here. We get along very well, all of us. You people you're just here because you've been sent here and told the wrong thing about us. We're good people here. You can imagine the rest of the speech. You could write it yourself. And I don't blame him. He was infuriating, sort of, but still, the man does stay there. I know I'm going back to St. Paul. I know I'm getting out of there. But he lives there with his wife and his kids. He's making a decent living, selling clothing on Main Street in his little store, like hundreds of other Jews in the South used to do. But just in ways, he was right. We didn't know what was going on. On the other level, we knew what was going on and saw it altogether different than he saw it. And I was not embarrassed that I was protesting his system. I felt sorry for him, not me. But it was a learning experience. Love your neighbor. Can you do it? Try. Well, as promised, eventually, afternoon of the second day, the NAACP lawyers got us out of there. During the night, some of the rabbis got the idea. We should write a letter explaining why we went. It was modeled a bit on what Martin had done when he was in the Birmingham jail. Some of you may have read his letter from the Birmingham jail. Well, you can find online the letter for which I am a signature, letter from St. Augustine jail, or letter from St. John County jail, or something like that. I was looking for it. I can't find it in it right now, but you can find it online. It's eloquently written. It was a committee project. Did you ever try to get 17 rabbis to write one statement? That was going on between about 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. as we took turns sleeping on the mattress on the floor. I was pretty quiet because I was awed. I was really with senior rabbis, very important ones. I'm blocked right now on the name of my senior colleague who was the editor on that. What's his name? Haim, do you remember it? I'll think of it when I stop trying to think of it. But he was a professor at the Hebrew Union College in New York.
Horowitz?
Borowitz, thank you. Borowitz. That's great. I always rely on time for help. Borowitz, he writes in a way that I would love to be able to write or speak. But he was taking our ideas and our arguments with one another and stating it out in beautiful English as a statement. It is a historical statement. Maybe. So I got out and was driven back to the airport, and I flew not to St. Paul, but to LA, where my wife and baby daughter were visiting our family here in LA. And of course, I had to pay bail to get out of the jail. I was arrested on 3 counts. Remember, one is trespassing, That one I've never figured out. I mean, is it trespassing to stand in the parking lot of a restaurant? I was arrested for disturbing the peace. And well, I guess the peace of that town was a segregationist system. But the big one really was conspiracy. And you know what? I plead guilty. I was part of a conspiracy to expose the inhuman qualities of an American city, the oldest American city. I was part of something much bigger than me. But that was a conspiracy in that town. A conspiracy which has its grip on America's civilization, the racism that runs through all of American civilization, now much more exposed. It's not just Mr. Bernstein who puts up with it in St. Augustine. It's everybody in Minneapolis, every policeman in St. Paul. It's part of the foundational structure of American life and our culture, racism. And we are and we continue to struggle with it, but it's layered so deeply, even into all of you good folks sitting and listening to me today. You can't live in America and not somehow be dragged into that racist tradition in ways you don't even recognize. I got back to Los Angeles and my parents, who had read about it in the LA Times and seen it on the news and knew I was one of the people. They invited all the friends and relatives to come to the house the following night to gather with me. And you know what they did? Is they all came with money to pay off my bail. $300 in 1964 was $3,000 today. It was probably about $10,000 equivalent in today's money, of $10,000. And just family and friends were able to kick in that kind of money the night afterwards. And that wasn't the only people. Back in St. Paul, they were raising money. I wasn't even there yet, just based on the newspaper reports. It was a moment of great celebration or celebrity or vicarious appreciation. That my family loved me and would support me, okay. But that the 700 families of Mount Zion Temple in St. Paul were thrilled that their rabbi had gone to participate in those demonstrations, that I had been arrested. They really took pride in it. They were Jews and they felt that I was somehow or other doing something they didn't do or couldn't do, but they were sure glad their rabbi had done. They weren't embarrassed. They were fortified by it. I'm going to finish just with a story. I went back to St. Paul, I don't know, it's about 10 years ago. The congregation had a major milestone in its history, and they invited each week one of the former rabbis to come back to the synagogue and meet the congregations today. So I came and I was there on one Friday night. And this younger man, he was in his 30s, I guess, he comes up to me after the service, like people do in synagogues and greet this clergy. He came back to Cohen. What's his first name? I've forgotten it. Steve Cohen. He was a member of the Minnesota state legislature. I'm going to cry. He had been in the confirmation class when I was there. And he came up to me. He told me he's now in the state assembly, a representative. I don't know why I get out of control there. He's in the assembly, and he has a reputation for supporting all kinds of social justice legislation. He tells me, the reporters always ask him, why are you involved in this, whatever social justice legislation it is? And his answer always is, because my rabbi went to jail. I couldn't say it. My rabbi went to jail. That's a story that encapsulates a whole range of values. I guess he saw it as heroic. I suppose it was heroic in a way. But he wanted to model his behavior in the state legislature of Minnesota the way he did, because his rabbi was arrested. Why did I go? So I could be famous? No, that wasn't it. So I'd sort of understand how demonstrations are run. Well, I kind of got that. There's a poem I read some years ago that was in the handout of a performance of a theater performance at the Mark Taper. Forget the name of it. It was a very, very fine drama about a Austrian man during the Nazi period who refused to serve in the German army. And he was killed, murdered, punished for it. It was well done. But in that little handout, the program, it says that somewhere in one's life, there's a grand moment presented to you. And you either say yes or no. And you live with your answer for the rest of your life. Well, I said yes to Martin Luther King's invitation. And it really has made a huge difference in my life ever since. Somebody's writing, a Jewish guy, is writing another biography about Martin Luther King Jr. He interviewed me earlier this week for what I remember of Martin Luther King. He's writing this book. He's interviewed all the Gedolim, all the big people who ever met and worked with Martin Luther King. And he's asking me now on a Zoom talk, not Zoom, just he and I. And he asked, why did you go? People are always asking me, why did you go? And I went because there was a still small voice in me that somehow, in ways I don't comprehend, giving me direction and focus. So here we are. It's an hour you've been listening to me. You want to know why I went? You figure it out. You figure it out.
Rabbi Jerry, I'm wondering if you would let us just first of all, just have a moment to absorb the power of everything you've said. And in a moment, allow us to not so much ask questions, but just to join in the power of all that you've said to us this morning. I've heard the story. I've never heard it like this today. And I just need to thank you for sharing this with us today. And I want to just let us sit for a moment. Can we ask questions? Let me invite people who have reactions to go to the button down below where it says reactions, and there is a place to raise a hand if you'd like to say something or ask a question.
I can't see all the little rectangles here. Can you patch them together, Haim?
I'll patch it together. Don't worry. I'll call on people.
So what do you make of my story?
Say again, please.
What do you make of my story?
Well, it's interesting because yesterday we were on a Zoom with, many of us were on a Zoom with Richard Hecht regarding the Middle East. And he was sharing, I think, a sense of the hopelessness that many of us feel about what we're observing. And as often happens, his analysis is that what was lacking in the situation of Israel was the leadership of religious people. And the question I was preparing for you today was the question in the way that you've answered. You answered, why did you go to St. Augustine? But you've also answered the question, what difference does it make that people of religious commitment were leading and were in the forefront and took the leadership in that struggle. The presence of people who had very political ideas. One of the things that Richard Hecht said is that religion is political. It's not apolitical. There's no such thing as apolitical, I think he would argue. And
you think I went for religious reasons? For political reasons?
No, I think that in the larger sense of what political means, that politics is about life. You began as I heard you, as a person that was curious and became committed. There was a transformation. And that transformation can only happen if a person is open to the religious demand of the hour, which is what you responded to.
Thank you.
That's a comment made more than the Hyman Goodman family is going to say something, please. Unmute. We can't hear you until you unmute. There. Thank
Yeah,
you.
okay, thank you so much, and thank you, Rabbi, and thank you all thanks so much for eloquent story, eloquent, memorable comments about a journey. The question I had is, have you ever gone back to St. Augustine to visit the
Yeah.
people? And what did you find, and when did you go?
This time, it was 50 years later. We were warmly greeted. There is change that has happened and change that hasn't happened. But there is change, and our return was sponsored by the St. Augustine Jewish Historical Society, which is bent on observing the history of the Jews in St. Augustine. And they had arranged with the local museum to have an exhibit of the events of 1964. And there were lots of reporters, even national reporters, who were there. Mind you, there were 50 years later, I may have been the youngest, but I was already a senior. So it was heartening to see Blacks in positions of responsibility at the museum. The lunch counters were open, restaurants were open. Some of the public facilities were integrated. But in Lincoln Town, the section of St. Augustine where Blacks had begun to live right after the Civil War. Lincoln Town tells you, freed Blacks lived in Lincoln Town. It is now a place where there are Blacks living, many of them in sort of old cottages. And then intermittent, because it's near downtown, it's getting gentrified. And there have been new places built there. You know the story of how when slums or bad areas or something start to get gentrified because the land is cheap and people have money and they get integrated. Capitalism in ways is a great integrator of people. It was weird being there, but not scary at all. I felt some sense of triumph. They interviewed me, for the University of Florida interviewed me. Guess what question they had for me to write for the oral history project at the University of Florida. Rabbi, why did you come to St. Augustine? So among the hundreds of times I've given my story, there it is, recorded in response to questions from the oral history project of the University of Florida. I'm flattered to be part of oral history in an American university. It was interesting going back and meeting some of the people. There is now a Reform synagogue, and it was a real center for people who were celebrating our return. For the Reform Jews in town, even the conservative synagogue, they were part of welcoming us with pride. Orthodox Jews were still left out of the mix. We're living in the same tradition, but on a different planet or something. It's a disappointment to me. But we Jews are a pluralistic people. There are many ways to be a Jew. There are many ways to be a good Jew. And we lean on those resources that we have and want to expand. Long answer. Thank you, Alan.
Other questions, thoughts, reflections? I think, Jerry, we want to express on behalf of all of us the gratitude that we feel in having heard this story. When we originally conceived of this program, it was right after the verdict in the Chauvin case.
That's true.
And you told me the story of the reception at the St. Paul Synagogue where you served.
Mhm.
It's of course difficult today to think of how the Jewish community has changed in just a few phrases and a few thoughts. But I know that maybe you have some closing reflections about that issue in the Jewish community.
Let me
It's
have a
hard
go
for
at
me
that.
to, pardon?
Let me have a go of that. We're trying to. It's gotten late. Let me say, it went through my head. My entrance into civil rights argumentation starts when I'm a rabbi in Minnesota, across the river from Minneapolis. And the case this year, the Chauvin case, it's last year and this year already. That is a monumental occasion. And I said that to my sister, who now lives in Minneapolis and is a member of a synagogue there. That for me, the Chauvin case is another huge step for dealing with racism. That the policemen were officially charged and convicted. Well, so far only one has been charged and convicted of I forget whatever it is. He's found guilty of murdering Floyd. That a policeman is held responsible for observing the rules of decency which govern American justice is monumental. The Senate of the United States in 1964 was considering the first of the great civil rights laws of 1964. There was a 64, a 65, and I think a 66. 3 laws which dealt with a lot with regularizing civil rights for Blacks. The first of those bills was stuck in the Senate and it was being filibustered. It had been filibustered, held up in the United States Senate for about 3 months. A week after our arrest, and no doubt reflecting in some proportion our arrest and demonstration, the filibuster came to an end and the Senate adopted the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Had to do with voting rights. Some acts make a difference. There is a ripple effect. In the history books of the 1960s, I'm a footnote. I'm a footnote for having been one of the 17 rabbis arrested in what led to the passage of the civil rights bills. It's not my judgment. It's branch I forget his last name, the historian who wrote the story of the 60s and Martin Luther King. I don't know, there's for me, a kind of wrapping around my life as a civil libertarian gets kindled when I'm at Mount Zion and St. Paul, and it finds some kind of realization years later in the Chauvin case in Minneapolis. I said that to my sister, and she says, you know, you're right. It is good that Minnesota is a place for change in the rigors of segregation and racism. Minnesota, which is pretty white, can be a place that leads many of us to recognize the disability of people of color, Black, Latino, Korean, whatever. They're all Americans, like we are all Americans. That is the heritage of this country. Yeah, we have to keep hope. If there's anything that must distinguish Jews, it is their hope. That goes back to your reading of Hosea today. Hosea was calling on the people of his time who are experiencing a whole threat to their existence in ancient Palestine and saying, we have to do what's right. We have to recognize God's law, which is a human rights law. We have to do that, and we can do it, and it will lead to a better world. The crops will come in on time. I hope the crops can come in time very soon. We've done a terrible job of messing up our planet. We're working on it. We have to have hope. I grow desperate with Palestine-Israel quarrel. I don't want it to go on forever. It can't go on forever. There has to be a breakthrough. May it come soon.
Rabbi Jerry and friends of Beth Ohr and everyone who's been a witness this morning to this wonderful Zoom, I want to thank you for your participation. I think we have some very powerful and important lessons and opportunities to learn. I'm glad we've recorded this session. A special warm thanks to you, Jerry, and we are in your debt for all that you've taught us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your rapt attention. I'm honored.
Wish everyone a good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom. I'm serving virtual peach jam because the peaches have come in. This year I succeeded in wresting most of the peaches from the squirrels. And so there is, I'll be sending it over the next Zoom because you'll join us for Shavuos. We'll let you put it on your blintzes tomorrow night. We look forward to seeing you. If we have a wonderful Shavuot program. We have 5 rabbis, 16 clowns, bears, tigers, a congregation of Torot, fabulous somersaults, and we
a tightrope walker even.
Say again?
You're going to walk the tightrope right across the arena.
Right, and we have this mountain that's going to be held above our heads, and we will decide. Well, okay, I'll tell you the rest later tomorrow. Shabbat Shalom. See you tomorrow night.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Yes.